Welcome to 321 I Relaunch, the podcast where we discuss return to work strategies, advice, and success stories. I'm Carol Fishman Cohen, CEO and co-founder of I Relaunch, and your host. Before we get started, I want to remind our listeners who are actively relaunching to make sure to sign up on the I Relaunch job board, because that's where employers go when they're looking to hire people who are returning from career break. So let's go on to our podcast conversation for today. Today, we welcome Chip Conley. After disrupting the hospitality industry twice, first as the founder of Joie de Vivre Hospitality, the second largest operator of boutique hotels in the world, and then as Airbnb's head of global hospitality and strategy, leading a worldwide revolution in travel, Chip co-founded Modern Elder Academy in January 2018. Dedicated to reframing the concept of aging, Modern Elder Academy, or MEA, supports students to navigate midlife with a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. Chip has an upcoming book, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, which is about rebranding midlife to help people understand a life stage that is misunderstood. And that book will be released in January 2024. In today's episode, we're going to talk to Chip about what it means to be a modern elder and the evolving perception of aging. Chip, welcome to 321 I Relaunch.
Carol, it's great to be with you. We both come from the same hometown, so I appreciate the fact that all these years later we're meeting for the first time.
Yes, and I didn't put that as part of the introduction, but Chip and I are both from Long Beach, California, and we don't often meet other people who are from our hometown. So that's been a real treat to talk about that. But Chip, let's begin by talking about your career path, including more about how you ended up with that role at Airbnb, but maybe take us through it from the early stages.
Yep. So I went to college and graduate school in the San Francisco Bay Area and got my MBA. And a couple years after getting an MBA at Stanford, I was in San Francisco and I was working for a commercial real estate developer. But I was seeing this idea of boutique hotels starting to pop up on the landscape. This was the mid-1980s. Mm-hmm. And I decided I wanted our company to become a boutique hotel company. And the CEO of the company said, no way. So at age 26, I decided to create a hotel company called Joie de Vivre, means Joy of Life in French. And for the next 24 years, I ran that business and grew quite large, 52 boutique hotels around California, each with their own name. And the thing that was interesting, Carol, is I had a dark night of the soul. Sometimes people take a time off from work because they're, having kids, or because they have to work with an ailing parent, or because they just need a sabbatical. Well, I was one of those people who just needed a sabbatical. I was burnt out in my mid to late 40s, and I had a flatline experience. I had an allergic reaction to an antibiotic, and I died 9 times over 90 minutes. And fortunately, I was brought back to life, or I wouldn't be here right now. And but that was sort of my wake up call to saying this isn't working. And so what I had to do then, it was say I'm gonna have to remake my whole life. And I had a lot of things that were not working well in my life at that point, personally, professionally, etc. Mm-hmm. And over the next 2 years, I sort of remade my life. And by age 50, at the bottom of the Great Recession, I'd sold Joie de Vivre, my boutique hotel company. And I didn't know what was next. I had a couple of years then when I just had spaciousness. And it was awkward for me in some ways, because if you're used to having your self-worth defined by how busy is your calendar, I wasn't feeling much self-worth. On the other hand, I was really exploring and curious about some things that I'd always wanted to learn about. And long story short is I had 2 beautiful years of spaciousness and trying out a few things. And then out of the blue, I got a call from the 3 young founders of Airbnb. This was 10 and a half years ago.
Yeah.
And nobody had ever heard of the company. They were a small tech startup that was growing globally, but it wasn't well known outside of the millennial world. And they said, we want you to help us democratize hospitality. And I said, okay, well, let's talk. And I spent the next few months helping them almost like an advisor consultant. And then they sat me down one day, and I thought they were going to tell me, like, Chip, you're an imbecile. You don't understand tech, which was true. I was in a tech company, and I was 52 years old, and I did not understand tech.
Uh-huh.
But I understood a bunch of other things. And they said, Chip, we brought you on because of your knowledge, but what we really got was your wisdom.
Hmm.
You are our modern elder. And I said,
Hmm.
I don't want to be a modern elder. You're making fun of my age. And they said, Chip, a modern elder is someone who's as curious as they are wise. And when I heard that, the nice alchemy of curiosity and wisdom, I said, well, that is what I hope you see me as, because that's how I like to show up in the world. And that led to me being there for 4 years full time as the in-house mentor to the founders and especially the CEO, and then 3.5 years part time. And I wrote a book called Wisdom at Work: The Making of a Modern Elder as a result of that. And as I was writing that book, I had this weird epiphany one day of, why are there no midlife wisdom schools? Why are there no places for people in midlife? When I say midlife broadly, I mean, sociologists now say it's 35 to 75, but I'm talking more like 40 to 60 or so, 40 to 65.
Yeah.
Where are the schools and tools and rites of passage and rituals for people to reimagine and repurpose themselves during the middle of our adult life? And that's how MEA, the Modern Elderly Academy, came about.
Mm, what an incredible story that is. Just I've been taking some notes because I have a few questions I wanted to ask you about things that you said along the way. So you call those 2 years when you were not had sold the business and before you went to join Airbnb as your time of spaciousness, but also made this remark about what relaunchers often feel when we're on career break, when we don't really have an elevator pitch and so much of society attaches, who we are as a person to what we do for work, and you take that away and it's like, so you feel a little bit like you don't know exactly who you are, what you want to say. So I was feeling a little bit of that. Is that,
Yeah.
did you have that as an element of what
Yeah.
was going on at the time?
The thing that's interesting, Carol, is, in retrospect, I can look back at it and say I was clueless. I had never studied midlife. I didn't know much about how do you take a break, and I'd read a little bit about sabbaticals, but what I ultimately came upon, I found was a term from a woman named Mary Catherine Bateson, who her mother was Margaret Mead, her father was Gregory Bateson, the famous psychologist. And she said, what the world needs is more midlife atriums. And let me
Hmm.
explain the metaphor for you. What she said is that we, in the 20th century, we added 30 years to longevity. Average age, life expectancy in 1900 was 47, and it became 77 by the year 2000. And what she said is, like, what we've sort of looked at as a society is that we have allowed people to be old longer. It's like you add 2 additional bedrooms to the backyard of a home. You have more time in the backyard, metaphorically, like more time at the end of your life. But she said what we really have is we have more space in the middle of our life. And what we need is not 2 bedrooms in the backyard. We need a midlife atrium,
Hmm.
because your midlife atrium is the time when you can have space to reflect, air and light, to imagine and have the space to imagine, how you want to live the second half of your adult life. If you're 54 years old and you're going to live till 90, you're exactly halfway through your adult life if you start counting at age 18. Most of us do not think that way. We don't think like at 54 somehow we're only halfway through our adult life, but we are. And that's a really important perspective to have, because
Yeah.
it allows you to say, gosh, I've got as many years ahead of me of adulthood as I have behind me. Maybe it's time for me to retrain or reskill or reimagine or do the thing I wanted to do when I was 18, but my parents talked me out of it. Now it's time to do it.
Right. Yeah, one of the things we talk about in relaunching and that we hear a lot from people who are on career break and want to get back is they want to do something totally different because either they fell into something career wise that, by accident almost, or they were fulfilling their parents or someone else's expectations. And
Yeah.
then this time now they want to do this for themselves. But, we're going to talk about this in a minute, what's now the 100-year life,
Yes.
that and the 60-year career. And it's interesting to hear you talk about that with the 77-year life. So I want to sort of park that as a reference point. One thing that I thought was interesting about the Airbnb story is it sounds like, did they actually come up with that term? Did they actually call you the modern elder and define it?
It was one of the people. It was actually not one of the founders who came up with it. It was somebody on their senior team, or on our senior team, who came up with it. They said they ultimately told me that, but I didn't. It wasn't. It was someone else who actually came up with it.
I see.
Yeah,
So, wow, it's kind of it's pretty profound, to come
yeah.
up with that and the definition and also then for you to think there's all this reframing going on. I'm thinking about your reframing now when you look at your adult life and you're only halfway through it. That's a complete reframing. And now I'm thinking about you hear that term and the definition and you sort of there's a shift and then you just ran with this. So what happened like from that moment when you left Airbnb and you began to formulate what became the Modern Elder Academy? Like, what were some of the steps you took at the beginning?
Well, let me start by saying, when it came to being at Airbnb, I realized that I was a mentor and an intern at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that term. It's a term I came up with and I wrote about in Wisdom at Work, because I really think that's the future. We live in a world in which intergenerational collaboration is more necessary than ever, and we have 5 generations in the workplace. And by the year 2025, Carol, the majority of Americans will have a younger boss. So we better get used to the idea of sometimes being the mentor, sometimes being the intern. In my case, I was mentoring Brian Chesky, the founder and CEO, but I actually reported to him too as the head of global hospitality and strategy. So that was an interesting experience. So what I can say is that let's all get used to the idea that we got to be careful about generational stereotypes. Some of them are accurate in certain ways, but they're generalizations and not necessarily appropriate and for everybody. And as is true of most stereotypes, that they are base. They don't really quite get the full nuance of a person. When I was leaving, part of the reason I decided I needed a break and moved to part-time was I was just like, hey, I was flying around the world. I was like the Secretary of State for the company. And for a company growing that fast all over the world, it was tiring. And so I decided I wanted to write this book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. And I wanted another midlife atrium. I wanted some space to write the book. And so I had a home in Baja, down here in southern Baja, an hour north of Cabo San Lucas. And I started writing the book. And as I was writing the book, I had no plans to do anything other than write the book and work part-time for Airbnb. But one day when I was going for a run on the beach, I had a Baja aha. I had an epiphany. And the epiphany was, why is it that we have no midlife wisdom schools, a place where a person can cultivate and harvest their wisdom? One of the things that we know is that as we age, if we're intentional about it, we can become wiser, because we can make sense of our life experiences and metabolize that experience. So that is how MEA got off the ground, and with a campus down here in Baja. And now we have a campus here in Baja. We have a campus in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that'll open early next year on 2,600 acres, a regenerative horse ranch. And we have online programs, and we have a program that's like wellness vacations with a little bit of content called Refresh. And then we even have regenerative residential communities, places where people can actually buy a home around a regenerative farm. So it's a sort of like disrupting the idea of retirement communities.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where MEA is, and we have scholarships as well as full tuition options. But more than anything, I was at a place in my life where I wasn't looking to make any money. I had done well with my Airbnb experience, and I really wanted to give back and do something, because I actually lost 5 friends to suicide. All of them midlifers. Some of them, actually all 5 were men, age 42 to 52 during the Great Recession. And so what I was really, I'd say the mission I had was to feel like I hope that I can create something that helps give more options to someone in midlife who is looking at aging as being a negative. And the reality is if you can shift your mindset on aging from negative to positive, you gain 7.5 years of additional life, according to Yale's Becca Levy. So, so helping people to see the upside of those years in your life is part of what we do, and we do it with social science and in a very experiential kind of workshop format.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was actually one of my questions about if you can give an example of what happens at one of. There's so many different things that are going on at Modern Elder Academy, but I'm thinking about our relauncher population, which is right in the middle of the 40s to 60s age range, and also, we're all trying to figure out how do we go back to work. You know, that age piece about the younger boss. So I myself went back to work at Bain Capital after an 11-year career break, and I was 42 years old, and I was working for a 37-year-old. And so that's the reality for many of us who relaunch our careers. And I guess I wanted to know if you could talk about people who might attend the Modern Elder Academy that are thinking about this change in their career one way or the other.
Yeah, we get a lot of people. I mean, the number one reason people come to MEA is because they're navigating a midlife transition. So that could be empty nest, start going, going back to work after having taken a break. It could be a divorce. It could be they want to start a new business. It could be their parents passing away.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a health diagnosis. There's a lot of things that bring people to MEA. And then we have our core curriculum has really 5 pieces to it: how to cultivate your wisdom, how to reframe your relationship with aging, how to move from a fixed to a growth mindset. Fourthly, how to understand transitions and navigate them, and then how to empower a new perspective, a regenerative perspective on purpose. And so within that frame of those 5 elements, then we have themes for our workshops. And so some of our workshops are like, relaunching. We don't have a workshop that says relaunch, although maybe we should do an iRelaunch workshop together with the iRelaunch community. But we have workshops that are like changing careers, coming back into the workforce. As you know, Diane Johnston's a good friend of ours, and
Yes.
she's on faculty, so she teaches workshops here. So I would say some of the core things that a person gets out of this is, number one, it's an opportunity to break with some of your habits, some of the habits you've had and some of the mindsets. Because one of the things that's true is that the first half of our life is about accumulating. We accumulate knowledge, we accumulate friends, we accumulate relationships and obligations and children and stuff. And then around 45 or 50, at what's called the bottom of the U curve of happiness, for those who don't know it, it's global research that has shown that the low point on average globally for life satisfaction is 45 to 50. And what happens is that sometimes people are just like overwhelmed with the accumulation.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the key things that we help people with, is, especially in the first 24 hours after they've arrived and they're in a workshop with 20 to 24 other people, is what am I ready to let go of? And we call it the great midlife edit. And like, what is it that's no longer serving me? Is it a mindset? Is it like I'm too old to learn technology or work in a tech company, which would have been one of mine before Airbnb called me.
Right.
Or it could be, I always have to be the caregiver, or I always have to be the hero. Or it could be, I make a bad first impression with people. And so these are mindsets, they're habits, they're archetypes, and we go through a process that helps people to identify these and to start to let go of them and replace them with something else. So there's an element of emotional and psychological support that people get in the first 24 hours that allows them to be more vulnerable. Because if you can get vulnerable and then you start to open up to possibilities. Just a few weeks ago, we had a litigation attorney who has just been hardcore in her life. And so her whole life has been like she's negotiating everything with anybody, and she doesn't like who she's become. But when she was a teenager, she used to help her grandmother cook pies, and she always loved baking. And so she came here, and she would never have come here expecting that this was what would come out of being you with us for a week. And she came here and just by the end of the week, she says, I'm going to, in the next 6 months, close down my legal practice. I'm going to go to cooking school, and I'm going to open a bakery in my neighborhood because a lot of things closed after COVID. And she's done that. So that's a good example of someone who had to get vulnerable because without that, she might have been just way too much in her brain. It's like, okay, how can I take my legal career and apply it over here not without having to do litigation? So, yeah.
Wow. So it sounds like people have these transformative experiences there,
Yes.
and you create the environment for them to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's the key, is to create the crucible for life-changing conversations, because so much of our life is, we're so regimented in terms of all the things we have to do. And yes, we get the occasional deeper conversation with a close friend or maybe family member, but to do this actually with people you don't know is very liberating. It's weird. That's one of the weird things. Like, oh, are you going to talk to? Yeah, I'm going to talk to people I don't know, because actually, one of the challenges we have in our lives in midlife is we also have we have a lot of different costumes of our identities. So with that group of people, I am a sibling. With that group of people, I'm a boss. With that group of people, I am a Republican or a Democrat. With that, and you sort of have a compartmentalization of yourself.
Yeah.
And so to actually come to a workshop where you're not having to show up with any of those identities, no one knows each other's LinkedIn. We don't send out LinkedIn links, and we don't tell people's last names. And so, by the end of the week, you maybe got someone to know someone's last name, but that's not part of it. So there's a liberation in being able to say, I can think more broadly about what my options are.
Chip, tell us about your books, especially the one that you were talking about as you were finishing up the Airbnb experience, or right along with that, and then this book that you have that's going to be coming out in January of 2024.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm lucky enough to I love writing. So I've been writing for more than 25 years, and the book that will be coming out in January will be my 7th book. Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder was the book I wrote at the end of my time at Airbnb, and that came out about 5 years ago. The new book is really based upon, having spent time with 3,500 alumni from 42 countries, all of them midlifers who've come here to our campus to understand this life stage, midlife, that don't get no respect. It's the Rodney Dangerfield of life stages, because it's a life stage that people don't really understand. And I was lucky enough a couple of months ago to be asked to give a speech at the big TED conference. Wow. I think that the video will come out this fall. And they asked me to give a speech on the midlife chrysalis, not the midlife crisis, but the midlife chrysalis, because midlife can be a transformative time if you know how to make it through that period of time. And iRelaunch and MEA are two of the resources out there that can help people to see that this era of your life can allow you to go through the liminality, or the transition from what you were to what you're going to become. And that is a very beautiful thing. Yes, it can be dark and gooey and solitary in the process, which is like what a chrysalis is between the caterpillar and the butterfly. But it really gives an opportunity for people, if they're open to it, to transform. And so the new book is a book that focuses on midlife and the 12 reasons why life gets better with age. So everything from, my emotional intelligence is growing and I am less emotionally reactive. And it has some social science around that, but also some storytelling around that. To the idea that, often after the kids are gone and things like that, you have some time affluence. You have some space in your life. And what do you do with that space? And how do you create your own midlife atrium? So there's 12 different reasons. And I'm excited. It's available on pre-order, and so people can order it in advance. My last book actually sold out so quickly that it took 3 weeks for them to have new books. So I would recommend pre-order. I've also recommended the publisher, but just print more books this time.
Right. Right. Exactly. And it's called Learning to Love Midlife: 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. Correct?
Exactly. That's exactly
Okay.
right.
But one thing I wanted to ask you about, as I was thinking as you were speaking, is, there's a lot of discussion now. There's a whole conference called the Century Summit around the
Yeah.
100-year life and
Mm-hmm.
the 60-year career. And, we're starting to think a lot about that at iRelaunch. But I'm just thinking how relevant your book is going to be, even more relevant for the youngest professionals now who could realistically expect to live 100 years and have that 60-year career. And what is that 60-year career going to look like?
Yeah. Well, back 30 or 40 years ago, the average worker had 3 jobs in their career, and their career lasted 40 years, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and just 3 changes. And so they didn't really have to get used to the idea of reskilling, and the world wasn't changing as fast as it is now. And today, the average worker later in life has had 13 different careers or 13 different jobs. So, and that's a 40-year career. If you're going to have a 60-year career, you're going to have even more.
Yeah.
I think the big shift that we're already seeing, and we're going to see even more, is the portfolio career. The
Mm-hmm.
idea that someone doesn't have a singular job that actually pays the bills. They have 2, 3, 4 different things. They might be an Airbnb host while they're also consulting for companies that in the field that they used to work in. They also make a little bit of money as a substitute teacher or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, a piano teacher. Now, at the higher levels, it could be that they're on a board. A lot of times when you're talking about the professionals in the world, their portfolio life is sort of a combination of, I've made some investments in these businesses and I'm on the boards of those businesses, some startups. And then I'm actually on a public board, and they fill their life with that. I'm not a big believer in filling your life. I
Mm-hmm.
think you need to have some space to see what emerges. But I also think the idea, as people are going to stay in the workplace longer, I think what we'll see is that they will start to piece together a career that has an entrepreneurial flair to it, because it's hard to go out and find a job at 72.
Right.
But if you want to be working in your 70s, I'm not saying it's impossible. It's definitely not impossible. A lot of people do. But if you want to be working in your 70s, it's probably going to be on your terms.
Mm.
And so the earlier in your career you can get used to the idea of saying, I'm going to have 2 or 3 different sources of income, and therefore I'm going to have 2 or 3 specialties of what I can do. Yeah, it's like a smorgasbord.
Yep. Yep. I think, was it Marcy Albaher that coined that term?
The portfolio. I don't think she did, although Marcy's she teaches at MEA, and I love her. She might have, though.
I remember something about.
Encore career. I think she and Mark came up with Encore career, but I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't know if the portfolio career was
I don't
her.
know. Anyway, I was just thinking about her because I remember when a book came out that had a reference to that kind of arrangement
Is the
of.
Encore Career Handbook, and so I think it was that focus as opposed to portfolio, but there's some similarities.
Yes, for sure. And it's interesting because just today I saw that the FDIC is looking to call back out of retirement experienced bank examiners because they need people to hit the ground running to be able to avoid, the next banking crisis. And they are seeking out the people who have these decades of institutional knowledge. So,
Yeah,
um,
I mean,
yeah.
we as we get older, we have what I like to call invisible productivity. And that invisible productivity is because we're there and we are often not perceived as a competitive threat career-wise, and because we have a wealth of knowledge and hopefully emotional moderation,
Hmm.
we are well suited to not just be productive in our own right, but to actually help all those around us. So we make the younger people around us better by
Hmm.
being there. And there's examples of this sort of in the wilds, like the grandmother phenomena, where the grandmother is taking care of the kids, and without grandmothers, with whales, younger whales don't live as long, and So there's an element. I'm not saying we're grandmothers. I'm not a grandmother, that's for sure. But what I am saying is being the modern elder, or being that sage worker who is able to do their job, but they also have a sort of intangible role of being the mentor to others.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I think social scientists are starting to research a little bit more, because we're going to see more of that.
Yeah, and it's certainly that's a reality for relaunchers who come back into organizations, and it's after their career break, but they have all this life experience, and a lot of that, what you're saying, really resonates and is consistent with what we see. The other thing with the 60-year career is we're thinking there are going to be more career breaks, and so the employers that have thought ahead, that have career reentry programs, conceivably could bring back people repeatedly if and I don't know how things like that are going to evolve, but it's just one possibility that we've spent some time thinking about. So anyway, so much to talk about. Chip, I just want, before we go any further, before I ask you the final question that we ask all of our podcast guests, I wanted to know if you can give our audience a little bit more information about two things. Modern Elder Academy, is there a website? Like, how do they find out about it? And also, is there a direct website or something where people can pre-order your book?
Yeah. So modernelderacademy.com, you can find it there. I also have a daily blog called Wisdom Well, and you can find that on the Modern Elder Academy website. And if you like it, it's a little microdose of wisdom. We send it to you, email it to you daily. It's free. Learning to Love Midlife is on my chipconley.com website. So you can find the book there and pre-order it there, as well as all my other books, and as well as speeches and articles I've written. I was lucky enough to write for Oprah recently, so there's an Oprah article there.
Yeah, and also I'm guessing your TED Talk will be on there. What an amazing experience, and how validating about your expertise and your experience that they asked you to speak on the big TED stage. So congratulations. That's really awesome. So is it Chip Conley, ChipConley?
Exactly.
ChipConley.com? Okay.
Exactly.
I always like to spell it.
Good idea.
Okay. All right. Perfect. And then let me just ask you this question that we ask all of our podcast guests, and that is, what is your best piece of advice for our relauncher audience, even if it's something that we've already talked about today?
So I would ask the following question: what is it you know now or have done now that you wish you'd known or done 10 years ago? So think about that for a moment. That's not the end of my answer here, but think about that. What's the thing you wish you'd learned 10 years ago? And now ask, moving forward, what is something you'll regret if you don't learn it or do it now? Because anticipated regret is a form of wisdom.
That's a great question and a great concept. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Carol.
All right. What a way to end our conversation, at least for now. I hope we have many more opportunities to speak. Chip, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, Carol, thank you. It's a joy.
And thanks for listening to 321 I Relaunch, the podcast where we talk about return to work strategies, advice, and success stories. I'm Carol Fishman Cohen, CEO and co-founder of iRelaunch, and your host. And please be sure to refer to irelaunch.com for resources that will help you in every stage of your relaunch. Thank you for joining us.